I think at my core, I'm very curious. I love to learn and I love to know new things and I want to know how things work and how people think and feel and behave. And I am absolutely optimistic. I don't care how bad things get. I have never in my life once lost hope that things couldn't get better. And can we all be candid? I think, and this is not a political thing. I don't care if you're right or left. This is one of the hardest times in higher ed that we as a sector have ever faced. And I am sure there are a lot of folks who have just lost hope, or have just said, my God, it's never going to be the same. I refuse to do that. And so I would say my superpower is the ability to just proceed forward, even in the face of some really tough odds. I just never lose hope.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this brand new episode of An Ingenious You, the podcast where we speak with higher education's most creative thinkers and doers. And in this current season, we are talking exclusively to higher education's most transformative women leaders. Today, I'm thrilled to introduce you to just such a leader, Dr. Patty Lynott, president of Rockford University, whose career has been defined by bold pivots, calculated risks, and an absolutely unshakable belief that anything is possible, even in the face of higher education's most challenging times. From being crushed by an early career rejection that she now calls one of the best things that ever happened to her, to packing up her entire life to follow a visionary leader to New Hampshire, to discovering that her true calling wasn't in the classroom, but in empowering others from the president's office. Patty's story challenges everything we know about traditional career planning. What I find most compelling about Patty is her hands-off leadership style that somehow produces extraordinary results. Her ability to spot untapped potential in people others have overlooked, and her refreshing honesty about both the costs and the rewards of leading at the highest levels. She's remarkably candid about what it was like to navigate leadership as a woman in the 80s and 90s, and how that experience shaped her into the authentic leader she is today. So if you've ever wondered how to maintain hope when everything feels uncertain, how to take smart risks on people and yourself, or what it really takes to lead with genuine confidence, this conversation is for you. Here's my conversation with Dr. Patty Lynott. President Lynott, I am so delighted to welcome you today to the Ingenious You podcast.
Well, I am thrilled to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me.
So our listeners love to learn about the leadership journeys of the guests that we have. And as I've explained, this season we're focused exclusively on conversations with women leaders. And you have had a very, very interesting career full of pivots and some interesting changes. So looking back, as you look back from this point on your career, can you identify or talk about one or two key turning points, particularly as you made the transition from the classroom to more senior leadership roles?
Sure, the pivot points are interesting. I like that question like that. When I first made the decision that I was going to be in higher ed, which actually doesn't come until later, early 30s, late 20s, early 30s. I was married, had a small child, and I loved teaching. So I wanted this teaching position at a local community college. It paid well. It would allow me to be close to my son, to see. I mean, it was perfect. I wanted it so bad, and I didn't get it. And I remember at the time just being crushed, being absolutely crushed. As I look back, had I taken that job, my career in higher ed, particularly higher ed leadership, would have been completely different. So it's funny how we think sometimes those things that are just the best thing we want in life and they don't happen. It's funny how it all works out. So
That's very
turning point for me. That was like, had I taken that job, I would be in a very different position today.
Yeah. And boy, you can see that now But when
Yeah,
you're at that point, and I think for our listeners, particularly those that are earlier in their careers, that's a great,
I was crushed. I
yeah,
was crushed. It crushed my spirit. I thought, oh, you lose confidence, right? And that's losing confidence it's a good thing because it teaches you how to get it back, right? You don't just fail. You got to pick yourself back up and move forward. And sure enough, by doing that, my life turned out probably even better than I could have planned. But at the time, there's no question you feel like, gosh, I just missed the best thing that ever could have happened.
yeah, yeah. So what did you go on and do then? You didn't get that job. So what was your
I
next?
did. So I went then and finished my PhD. And I thought to myself, I still wanted to look for a teaching position because, again, as a mom, and I just thought, plus I love the classroom. I mean, I'd been an adjunct, and that's what I wanted to do. And, who wanted to be one of those administrators that had to deal with all that stuff? And so, like a lot of faculty, I kind of cut my teeth as an adjunct, right? Teaching at different institutions and I happened to be teaching a speech course at Elmhurst College. And at the time, it was Elmhurst College. And that converted into a full time line. And I took that position. I stayed there for, gosh, I must have been about totally 15 years now. I stayed there in the classroom for about 7 years. And at some point, and I don't remember what year it was, the president, Brian Curtin, came to me and said, "Patty, we need a dean of our adult and continuing ed division that Richard Roten is changing, and we need someone. And you've had some work experience before you were in higher ed, and would you think about it?" Well, at that time, I had recently become a single mom, right? And I didn't want to take the job at first because I loved my schedule, right? Being a mom, it was an easier schedule. Summers were easier, but the salary of an associate tenured professor of speech was certainly not a great thing to raise a child on. So the salary was better. So I thought, you know what I'll do? I'll take this for a few years. I negotiated retreat rights. I had a retreat rights clause that said I'm going back to my line when I'm done with this, administrative stuff. And so I took the job and I admit, don't know why, don't even care why. Within a month, I knew that I was meant to be in administration for some reason. Don't know. Again, never analyzed enough to understand why. My ability to help other faculty have a better classroom experience, my ability to help students. I had more power and influence to really move the dial in higher ed than I am just in the classroom. But I always thank God that I was in the classroom for that many years because I honestly understood the challenges of faculty, right? I knew what it meant to go up for tenure. I knew what it meant to have a schedule that worked. I knew what it meant to have students sitting in front of you and wanting to do the very best that you could for them in terms of getting them to graduation, et cetera. But for me, I felt that I could do more. I had more of an ability to make an impact on an institution from my role as an administrator.
Yeah. Boy, that's a very powerful realization. It's interesting that becoming a single mother apparently is the trigger that really influenced your decision to move into something where you really found your calling. It sounds like. Is
Yeah,
that
and nobody wants to be. I mean, yeah, that wasn't in my on my bingo card. Becoming a single mom, it just thing life happens, and it ended up that way. And for me, it was I wanted my son to have the same level of benefits as when you come from a household that had more income. So to me, it was an income thing. The whole decision was based on it was going to be a better income.
yeah.
It never occurred to me that I would be finding something that also provided me with much greater opportunity and an ability to be creative and make an impact in a different way.
Yeah. So it obviously changed. Tell me if this is right. What I'm hearing you say is that this pivot, however it came about, changed the way you viewed your own ambition, maybe, and aspirations. but not something you had. I love on your bingo card. I like that analogy.
It did. Well, something I think I'd always known about myself, whatever sphere I'm in, I always kind of want to be at the top of the sphere. If you can do that, if you can be that way. And so how this progressed in my role as dean, also Elmhurst at the time opened up based on more of a for-profit model, Elmhurst Partners, which was a training and development arm. So I took that on as well, right? So my skill sets and my program development and my management skills were all kind of evolving and growing. And then at some point, it was my president, Bryant Curitan, came up to me and said, "Patty, I think that you are, I'm going to target you for even greater leadership. I want to send you up to this president's forum up in Wisconsin at Edgewood College." And I said, "Wow." And that's the first time because it hadn't even crossed my mind, right? I was sitting pretty, feeling really good about things. And I remember going to Edgewood College, and it was, there were like 4 or 5 different presidents presenting at this conference. And I, for some reason, as one of the participants, we all had to present something. And so I presented. After that presentation, this tall guy from New Hampshire comes up to me and says, "I'm Paul LeBlanc, and you got to come to work for me." And I said, "Paul LeBlanc from where?" "Southern New Hampshire University." I remember going, "Where's New Hampshire?" I was making a joke. It was like, who goes to New Hampshire? Um, that was in like 2004, maybe five. And it took about a year or so, but Paul kept pursuing me to come to be his provost, actually, but vice president, BPAA. But remember, I'm a Chicago area girl, lived in the Chicago area my whole life. But my son now, time has gone on. He's leaving high school, going into college. So I'm not place bound anymore. I literally packed up everything I owned, left the only area I had ever lived in, had no family, no friends, and started a career in New Hampshire again. And I don't know why, if I'm just a lucky person, but within weeks, it was perfect. And it was the best decision I could have made. And I stayed there for 15 years. I grew as well, but that President Curitan urging me to go to that seminar and then meeting someone like Paul, and then the timing of it, having that child of mine become an adult and
Yeah.
not be allowed me to make those other decisions that I don't think I would have made. I mean, that could have failed, and I would have been walking away from tenure, right? What if it failed? I'd given up, right? If I leave Elmhurst, I give up my ability to have tenure, right? Those retreat rights.
Yeah.
But it was a risk I was willing to take.
Yeah, yeah. And you don't ever know, do you, when you make those
Nope.
decisions? And then you rode the rocket, the Southern New Hampshire University growth and expansion, which you played a very important role in. So, wow. So, if you had to sum up the most important influences that have shaped your leadership journey, what are they? What's one or two? I mean, it sounds like people, obviously, but
I tend to follow people, not movements and Paul was incredibly. I remember when I met him, he was like, "I'm gonna change higher education." I go, "Oh boy, this guy's a little on the arrogant side." And by the way, I'm not wrong. Paul has that tendency to do that, but it's earned, it's deserved because he was brilliant. And what I learned from Paul, I think there's part of it in me, but I really saw it in him. He is not only just very intelligent, but he is curious and he's optimistic. He believes you can do anything. And I like people like that. I like to surround myself with people who believe anything is possible. And I think because of that, I believed in him so much that I was willing to take that chance. Now, had I been at a different age, I don't know at my age now, what was I probably then 50, 50, I don't remember, but I don't know that I'd be willing to take that bigger risk this much later in my life.
so let's talk a little bit more about your leadership style. And I'm particularly interested in having you look at your leadership style through a gendered kind of lens. So, first of all, how would you describe your way of leading today? If you have a philosophy, or if I were to hang around in the corner of your campus there, what would I see in terms of how you actually enact your leadership?
Well, I I would say I'm probably a better leader than a manager. And let me explain that. I do best with highly intelligent, motivated, independent people who I can just let loose and they come to me if they need me to run interference or if they simply can't figure something. I do not, my strength is not, and I wish I had, God, I wish I could have developed that more over my career. I'm not as good. I'm impatient is probably part of it with folks who need a lot of nurturing, who need a lot of guidance, who need a lot of handholding, professionally needy people, and they are good people. I'm not saying, but people who need lots of strokes and who need lots of direction and guidance. That's not, there are good managers who can do that. That's not me. That's not me. But give me someone who maybe lacks a little confidence or who's never been put in a position to do something extraordinary. If I can see they've got motivation and they've got, my leadership style is take a risk, give someone a chance, give them the support that they need, and be there for them as they learn, and let them know it's absolutely okay to fail. I'm the best lessons I've learned in my life are from my failures, right? Because I never make the same mistake twice. So my style is pretty laissez-faire. It's pretty hands-off. I am not a micromanager in any way, shape, or form. I'm direct. That's a good thing and a bad thing. There are a lot of people who don't respond well to directness. I think because of the era in which I came up through the ranks, in order to assimilate, in order to survive, I adopted more male type of leadership behaviors because those were the behaviors that allowed success, right? The problem with that was when a man was assertive in a meeting, that was considered a strong, good. When women were assertive in a meeting, it wasn't received the same way. So it was far more difficult back in the 80s and the 90s to succeed in a leadership role in higher ed.
As
That's
a
the only sector I'm really familiar with, and it was difficult. Yeah.
as a woman, it's
Yeah, yeah,
difficult.
absolutely. Yes.
How has your leadership style changed or evolved? If you think about who you were as a leader in the 80s and who you are now in your presidential role, are there some differences or places where you're more comfortable?
Well, I would say, particularly at this, so I'm in a really unique position now. So I technically retired in 2020. Uh, so for the first time in my life in 2020, I didn't have to work. I could have just, I mean, remember, I was a single mom for most of it. So you have to put food on the table, make sure your child is okay. But I took this job originally to just on a temporary basis to help a small school out that was struggling. And I believe in the small private colleges. I believe if they disappear from this planet, we are going to be in deep trouble because we serve an incredible purpose. So I thought, how can I help this institution? The difference now is that I really don't care if, I mean, I don't have to play politics. I don't, if for some reason if I had to make a tough decision, I don't worry about a vote of no confidence. God forbid that's not what anyone wants. But you know what? I'm not building my resume anymore. The only thing I have to do is make the best decision that I think is going to secure the perpetuity of this institution. Wouldn't it be cool if all of us through our career were able to do that? We didn't have to play politics because we were worried about losing our job here. We didn't have to play. We could just make the best. I still don't think most leaders, and I think particularly women, we don't have that freedom, that ability yet. So my leadership style has changed in that I am freed from having to do the political jockeying, right?
Yeah.
I think more patient, but that's only I think as a factor of getting older too. I'm a little more patient.
Yeah, yeah. So what's your superpower? What's that? If you have to strip everything else away, what's the thing that most defines you as a leader?
I think that thing that I talked about earlier that actually kind of made me gravitate towards Paul, I think at my core, I'm very curious. I love to learn and I love to know new things and I want to know how things work and how people think and feel and behave. And I am absolutely optimistic. I don't care how bad things get. I have never in my life once lost hope that things couldn't get better. And can we all be candid? I think, and this is not a political thing. I don't care if you're right or left. This is one of the hardest times in higher ed that we as a sector have ever faced. And I am sure there are a lot of folks who have just lost hope, or have just said, my God, it's never going to be the same. That I refuse to do that. And so I would say my superpower is the ability to just proceed forward, even in the face of some really tough odds. I just never lose hope.
You have the experience. You've completed most of the coursework in a doctoral program, but you have not completed that dissertation. Now you have a path to leave your ABD, that's all but dissertation status, behind with Bay Path University. Our innovative Doctor of Education and Educational Leadership ABD degree completion program makes it easier than ever for qualified candidates to finish what you started. Our one-of-a-kind program builds on your previous experience with coursework designed to strengthen your innovative leadership mindset and gain the skill set you need to lead and to transform educational institutions for the 21st century. The coursework for the ABD degree completion program is entirely online and can be completed in well under 2 years. What's more, you will have an abundance of support along the way, from your dedicated faculty advisor to your small dissertation seminar group of classmates with whom you will meet regularly for dissertation advisement and much needed encouragement. With Bay Path University, there's no reason to wait any longer. Trade up from ABD to EDD and take your place among the next generation of educational leaders. For more information, visit our website at baypath.edu/EDD. Don't wait a minute longer. Make today the day you finish what you started.
I'm curious what your take is on, and I think I know based on what you've said, but I want to dig a little deeper here, particularly in the presidential role. Do you think women are being held to different standards, or maybe the senior level roles in higher ed? Certainly that used to be the case. I'm curious what you find now and if you've encountered that in your own experience.
So I certainly think it's better. The expectations that women are held to today are certainly more fair and balanced than they were when I first started in higher ed. No question about it. But is it a level playing field? No, I don't believe it is. I don't, not yet, not yet. And I think you can still see that in salaries. I think you can see that in, um, let me also say this, as a single mom, right? As a single mom, I think for a long time, and just not so much today, but there's this expectation then that I should just be at everything and anything because I don't have those other responsibilities. That's not what would be expected of a single dad. I don't think that would be. I think I'm fair in characterizing it that way. So I think things have improved, no question about it. But I do not believe we have fully found a level playing field just yet.
So, what can institutions do then to support women into leadership roles? So, again, thinking of your own experience and the women you may be mentoring, I'm imagining there are a number of women you've influenced over the course of your career. I know you were very helpful to me at an earlier point through conversations that we had. So, what should institutions do not only to keep women, but to help them thrive in these leadership roles?
Well, so you just said something, Melissa, that I would really love to kind of highlight. I wish I could say to you that I have this, you know, formal mentoring, approach. I actually that's never been my style. I've never kind of said, "Let's sit down. We're gonna, I'm gonna be your mentor and we're gonna do this, and on this day, here's our outcomes." I have a much more informal, conversational relationship with the women. You use the word influence. I would rather think of myself as someone who's been able to influence other women, then I don't know why I push back so on the term mentoring, because I think because I'm afraid people, it sounds too sterile to me. It sounds like it has to be really prescriptive. And that's never been my style. My style has been more as a friend and a colleague, like, how can I help? How can I, what are we doing here? What would you do different with that? That kind of thing. And again, as I've gotten in more senior roles, I have literally put women into positions where they have power and where they're given a salary and a title to grow and to move. And then we talk and but it's not like here's this formal mentoring process with a schedule. It's just never been my style.
Yes, but that doesn't at all limit the impact you've had, because I know, and I like the word influence. I think that is maybe a more appropriate descriptor for the kind of impact you've had. I don't know if you remember, we had breakfast. This was years ago at the
Really
CIC Chief Academic Officers meeting, and you
remember.
made the time, and it was very impactful just in terms of some things that I needed a perspective on. And I know you've done that time and again. So, um, that is
And
every
I'm probably most proud of that, to be quite honest with you. As I look back on my career, I think back when I was at SNHU and my part-time administrative assistant who was staying at home to raise her children. God, I saw such potential in Janie, and she was so great. And I believe now she's a vice president or a senior vice president, not sure what that, but you just watching her flourish. Same thing when I came here, there was an administrative assistant. She's now the chief of staff. How this woman was not utilized more. I mean, I go to her. I mean, she's brilliant, giving women those opportunities now it doesn't always work, by the way. I've made some, listen, we all make investments. Some work, some do not, but I would never stop making those investments.
well, and so you're talking in terms of what can you do specifically, you're talking about seeing the talent, calling it
Yes.
out, right?
Yep.
Naming it, which I think for women, right? And a lot of times we don't always see our potential.
Right.
And
That's
so
right.
that's part of what you've done. And then give them the opportunity to,
That's it. And let them know it's okay to fail. You are not going to get this 100% right every time. And that's okay. You will learn so much from those failures. I think sometimes we're hard on people when they fail. The only time I have had issues is when I see an individual make the same mistake multiple times. Then I have to move in and do something a little more formal and work on that. So doesn't happen often. It's
so
happened.
speaking of failures or barriers, can you share one of the most difficult barriers?
So, it's hard to, we're a small community. I don't care, higher ed, and everybody knows everybody, right? So I want to be careful as I say this. I can remember wanting to go up for tenure, and because I came to it a little bit later in life, I wanted, and we all want to do this, right? I wanted to accelerate. I wanted to know if I could get credit for time served. And I remember going to this dean that I reported to, and asking this dean, could I advance the process, blah, 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 something to that effect. But I remember very specifically this dean saying to me, I'm going to paraphrase now, you need to just slow it down a little bit. You don't really understand what's involved here. And very patronizing. And I remember looking at that dean and saying, don't ever underestimate me. And because I was angry, I remember that because he was just being patronizing. When I left that institution, he was working for me, and I felt really good about that. But that was the first obstacle. I'll never forget him actually coming up to me and reminding me of that. And he was actually very good about it and very humbled by it.
That's not an easy thing to do, though. I mean, you had strengths obviously within you that gave you the wherewithal to set some boundaries, right? In terms of how you were going to be treated.
I think a lot of women would do that, except I think there is this fear because that's a risk. When we do that, we are so afraid that we're going to get fired, that we're going to be written up. So I think that you have to be willing to take a risk. You may, in fact, say or do something that's not going to be well received, But I remember in that moment feeling offended and feeling patronized. And to me, it was worth the risk of actually kind of pushing back on this employer and saying, hey, don't underestimate me.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Well, good for you. So, on a very practical level, what do you think are the most important things that aspiring leaders, and again, let's talk about women and underrepresented individuals, what do they need to know about what it's like to lead at the very top of the institution?
I would encourage anyone who seeks any kind of leadership role need to have, leadership is multifaceted, lots of dimensions to it, but there is one core that you better have confidence. And not arrogance and not believing that you can, do anything and you're perfect, but you had better be able to manage any kind of self-doubt that's crippling, because as you advance in leadership, there are going to be challenges. People are going to push back. And I think what we don't do enough, and what I would encourage people to do, what's the biggest obstacle to confidence, right? Our insecurities. We all have them. Can you identify what those are? I think for a lot of folks, there's common, right? We have physical appearance. We're insecure about our looks. We're insecure about, are people going to like me? Imposter syndrome, those things. Can you identify? For me, and this has been a life's journey. I had to the source, and I would bet this is for a lot of people. If you really want to identify the source of a lot of your own insecurities, look to your childhood experiences and your family dynamics, right? And once you can kind of wrap your arms around those, I think it helps you then get that confidence that you're going to need if you're going to be a leader in higher education, particularly today. Because if you do not have confidence, boy, you're going to get beaten up pretty bad.
So, where did that come from for you? Where did it come from? What helped you?
Well, I honestly think for me, like I said, and this is like a psychiatrist or a therapist, but I will tell you, me looking inward early on in my life and recognizing that I was raised by incredible parents. They're wonderful people, but they were critical, right? And they were negligent by today's standards, certainly nothing or do. But what you learn about yourself is one, what doubts I had about myself was being as a kid when you have critical parents and what they're trying to do, right? In that generation, they're trying to inspire you to improve by telling you, right, you're not doing this, you're not doing that. I had to recognize that had shaped my self perspective. And you don't get mad at your parent. First of all, talk to your parents, which I remember doing, didn't go over well. So if you can't change people, and you probably can't, a lot of cases, you can forgive them. You don't need anyone's permission to forgive people,
Yeah.
right? And I found that in the workplace. If you are working with someone who can make you feel bad about yourself, you owe it to yourself. Talk to that person about it. You might not be able to change them, but you can change how you respond to it, because people who make you feel bad about it have the power to knock your confidence out.
Mm.
Don't ever give anybody that kind of power, right?
Yeah.
So that's how I feel about it.
Yeah. So, wow. Well, thank you for sharing that. Now, there is a cost, as you know, often a cost to being the first or the only woman in the in the room, or being the first in a particular role. How have you sustained your voice and your sense of self in spaces where you have had to prove yourself or prove your worth?
So, in terms of my professional life, I think it was more of a challenge while I was at Elmhurst, because I was one of only two women that was on cabinet. And she was a CFO, but God, she was a marvelous role model for me. Not a formal mentor, but I remember just by observing Denise and watching how she handled herself and how she responded to questions. Because, by the way, mentorship is observe or also watch. If you see a good leader, observe what are they doing and emulate that. By the time I was at SNHU, things had changed just in the culture and in higher ed in terms of women's role. But Paul also was very good about seeing to it that he had larger numbers of women in leadership roles and on the board. right? Because there's the same thing. That is very important. Getting an organization and an institution to recognize that the lack of female leadership or whatever group that is underrepresented, moving towards a good representation is going to make for a better institution. But not all places are there yet.
You have talked elsewhere about the importance of joy and connection in your leadership. And I'm guessing that's part of how you've sustained yourself in terms of the journey and the ups and the downs. So, how do you nurture those qualities, especially, when you're in a high pressure kind of role that doesn't always reward vulnerability? What do you do to bring on the joy and the
So for those of
connectedness?
us in higher ed, it's so easy. Just walk out on campus and get with those kids,
Yeah.
get with our students. I, to this day, am always regenerated when our students are back on. There's something about working with young people. You talk about hope, right? Talk about, and so for me, I love my work because when I honestly see, you know, a young person who comes into this place, sitting in that back row staring at you like, teach me, I dare you. And then you're handing them a diploma 4 years later, and they're this polished, accomplished young person. Tell me that brings anybody joy. It's such a sense of fulfillment. And it still makes me happy to this day.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. What else do you do to get out of the job? I mean, you obviously have a full life. So, what other kinds of things bring you joy?
Not enough. I do not. That is the downside, I think, about being single and about my son, is not in the area. I kept lots of nieces and nephews and this and that, but I tend to make my work life, I intertwine it very, very deeply with my personal life. That's not a bad thing, but I have to be careful with that. But when you're in a position like in a presidential role, you have so many opportunities to be out with fascinating people and in situations that are exciting. It's really easy to merge those two. Need to do a better, and I'm sure women everywhere who are listening to this know what I'm talking about. We have to do a better job of walking away from these places and doing absolutely nothing but focusing on us. Just if it's only for a week, a year, whatever it is, but we've got to walk away and turn this phone off, right? I mean, this thing is with me constantly. And there it is, you've just got to turn it off and walk away. It's harder to do.
Well, it is today, right? With the presence of electronics and social media. And I think in your role too, because it's community, or you're in a place where people see you. I would imagine you go to the grocery store, people know who you are, right? So, Patty, I have one final question. We're at the end of our conversation, and I've so enjoyed this. It's really fun to hear your insights. Here's the last question, and it's I'm going to ask you to lean into your positivity here. So, what do you most want women in higher education leadership to know about what's possible for them? And what do you wish someone had told you when you were just starting out?
Well, for women today, I would want them to believe, as I continue to believe, that anything is possible. And there will be times in their careers where that will be hard for them to remember, right? There are going to be challenges and problems and tough decisions you have to make. And the toughest ones are what? They're always dealing with people, right? If you have to terminate people, if you have to close a program, if you have, those are the hardest. So recognize that you're going to have to work on that positivity. It's not just going to automatically, but anything is possible. I wish I would have known that there would be some times when I would literally go home at night and cry my eyes out because I remember I had to terminate. We had to make a lot of cuts one day. I don't know what they called it, Black Friday, and it was horrible. And I had to let a handful of people go. And there was an admin, this And I loved her dearly, and having to tell her that her job was no longer here, and it was really, and I'll never forget, she leans over to me and says, puts her hand on my hand and says, "Dr. Lynott, don't worry. When God closes a door, he opens a window." And I just burst, and I thought to myself, I love that. I love someone like that. And I wish I had known earlier on that I would be in situations that would be very difficult, but boy, I can still learn. I learned so much just from that woman that day, right? About being positive. So yeah, I wish someone would have said, prepare yourself. There are gonna be some tough times.
Yeah. Well, that's the gift you're now giving to others. So, Patty, thank you so much.
It's so good to
For
see you. And you look great, by the way.
Well, we're
You look good.
when you're doing what gives you passion and
Oh,
feeds your soul, it makes a world of difference. So,
you can
and
tell.
so all good wishes to you. Thank you
And you as
again,
well.
and enjoy the rest of summer.
And that's a wrap on today's Ingenious You episode. A very big thank you for tuning in and sharing this time with us. Don't forget to stay in the loop with our Center for Higher Education Leadership and Innovative Practice, the hub that brings this podcast to life. Chellup is also behind the free monthly webinars on all things cutting edge in higher ed and offers some terrific certificate programs to boot. Have you checked out our YouTube channel yet? It's where the magic of our top-rated episodes from past seasons comes alive with video interviews. Hit that subscribe button so you're always in the know with our latest and greatest content. Like what you heard? Take a moment to rate and review Ingenious You on your podcast platform of choice. Spread the word to your friends and colleagues and invite them to join our Ingenious You circle. Until next time, keep innovating, keep inspiring, and keep making a difference. Stay safe, stay connected, and above all, stay ingenious.